Well, happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for joining us today to the Recovery Summit presented by St. Clair County Community Mental Health with support from the St. Clair County Health Department. This is our second presentation as of two today, so we're really excited to close out a beautiful Friday, at least it's beautiful here in Port Huron, Michigan, with our last presentation of the day. Today's presentation is on DBT and the 12 steps. I'm going to go over some brief housekeeping. I'm sure those of you who have been to several of our sessions have heard this several times, so we'll try and get through it as quick as we can, but just really important reminders. For our presentation today, please use the chat feature for all questions and comments. Our presenters will be answering questions as time allows. So go ahead and put those questions right in that chat box and we'll make sure we get to them if we're able to. Today's presentation offers one social work continuing education credit and one McBAP credit and also one peer credit for recovery coaches and peer specialists. If you're requesting professional credits, you must remain on the webinar for the entire time, all the way at the end. And if for any reason you lose connection or anything on your computer or your device, just go ahead and rejoin in as quick as you can so that you get credit for the entirety of the time. A survey will pop up following the conclusion of today's webinar right up on your Zoom. Those of you that are requesting social work CEs, completion of the survey is necessary to be able to get those credits. Now I'd like to go ahead and move over to our presenters today. Both of these individuals I know very well. We have Devin France and we have Megan Kuhn joining us today. Very excited for them to talk about DBT and the 12 steps. I have great introductions for both of them, but I think today is a good day just to have both of them introduce themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and put it over to both Devin and to Megan. So I am going to introduce both of them. Hi, Devin. Hi, Megan.
Hi.
Good morning. Good morning. So I'm going to go ahead and put the floor over to you. So you have the stage.
All right. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Devin France. I am a social worker at Renewal Christian Counseling currently. I started my career at St. Clair County Community Mental Health in 2014 as a certified peer support specialist, back before peer recovery coaches were a thing. So I have worked in the DBT program, and that is where my passion for DBT and the skills have come from. I want to give thanks to all the therapists that have helped coach me through the years on DBT and have given me all the knowledge that I have. I'm really excited to be here and share about how DBT helps people like us in recovery.
And my name is Megan Kuhn. I am a case manager at CMH in the IDBT program. I've worked at CMH for 10 years. I was actually the first peer recovery coach hired in St. Clair County. And I'm excited to be here with Devin today to talk about how the 12 steps in DBT can improve people's lives.
So to begin with today, I'm going to just go over the agenda. We already did the introduction. I'm going to talk a minute about what DBT actually is. And then we are going to talk about how the 12 steps in DBT blend. In between the time that we're talking about the steps and the skills, we're going to share a little bit about our stories and how you can deliver this treatment for addiction, but also how DBT is something that can be used for many things. And so at the end, throughout the presentation, we'll stop periodically if there's questions and answer those. Adrian will let us know. And then our contact information will be at the end, along with some resources on different things about where you can find DBT skills, where you can find the workbooks, how you can get your hands on the evidence-based treatment and what that looks like. So we will have all that at the end for you if you don't have time, if we don't have time for questions.
All right, so first we're going to start off with a video from Marsha Linehan, who is the developer of DBT.
Good news here is it's probably good for everyone. The only reason I know that is everybody I know uses them for a long time. I use them all the time. Just about everybody can use skills, be more skillful. And the only people who don't need DBT skills are were very regulated. So skills are really good for depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, drug use, anxiety disorder, etc. So skills are really about how to be effective. I mean, essentially, beginning to end, they have to do with how to engage in life in an effective way, how to act effectively. The average person can do the skills. They're not that difficult. The only real thing that happens is that you often have people who get furious at you for telling them the skill because it sounds like invalidating them. The job of the therapist is to figure out a way to make you see that your life's going to be a lot better if you buy in than if you don't. And you'd be amazed at how many people, if they try it long enough, they'll then start saying, "Hey, you're so right. I feel a lot happier now. I feel better," or this, that, or the other. Generally, if you can get people to practice for a while, you don't give them too much of a hard time. What most people will find out is that over time, they're happier using the skills in life.
So that was a video that basically speaks to exactly why I'm so passionate about DBT and the 12 steps funding. I use this a lot in my personal practice and therapy with people, because one thing I've learned from my own experience in recovery is that DBT can be used for a lot of different things. So to just speak on what is DBT, DBT is dialectical behavior therapy. It was created by Marshall Linehan, and initially it was created for treatment specifically of borderline personality disorder. And part of the reason that was is because of the high risk behaviors that some of the personality disorders those people would have, and how to help them stay alive, how to help them quit using drugs, or how to curb some of the self-harm urges that come along with that diagnosis. So one thing we've learned through research is that DBT skills can help with a lot of different disorders, and you don't even necessarily need to have one for these skills to help you. So in DBT specifically, we go over emotion regulation, interpersonal effectiveness, distress tolerance, mindfulness, and then later on, there was an entire module created for the treatment of addiction. So it's when the crisis is addiction is the module. And so DBT right now, today, we're going to focus on specifically how those skills and those modules blend with the 12 steps.
All right, so step one, we admitted we were powerless over our addiction and that our lives had become unmanageable. Step one requires acceptance and honesty. I had to accept that I had an addiction and that I was powerless over my use. For many years, I lived in denial, telling myself that I could stop if I wanted to. When the denial was gone, I spent a few more years living with guilt and shame, isolating myself from the people that loved me. I placed a lot of blame on situations and those around me. I had to gain acceptance of where I was at and how I got there to be able to take ownership of my part in my addiction and to begin the recovery process. I realized I wasn't responsible for the things that had happened to me in my life, but I was responsible for my recovery.
So the two skills that blend with step one from DBT is radical acceptance and mindfulness of current thoughts. One thing that I want to say before I get going on these specifically is that there are a lot of skills throughout the modules that would relate to step one. And if you were delivering this treatment, whether you were a peer support specialist, a peer recovery coach, a therapist, a case manager, you would take the skills that kind of align with step one's principles. So in this, I chose to talk about radical acceptance. Radical acceptance from DBT is in the distress tolerance module, and radical acceptance is a skill that teaches people how to accept things that they may not like, but that are their reality. And the pain of rejecting the reality that they're in causes more distress for them than accepting the reality and moving forward from there. Mindfulness of current thought is very much something that can be a collaboration skill with radical acceptance, recognizing that sometimes even in our powerlessness with step one, that can feel defeating for people initially. It's one of those things as you're helping someone work the steps that they know their lives are unmanageable, and we know that we're powerless over our addiction. So one of the first things in recovery for a lot of us is recognizing that we have to accept that what we once thought worked now doesn't, and how do we move forward from here? And in that, being mindful of our current thoughts, sometimes I think a lot of us in general don't recognize how powerful our thoughts are. And so as we are beginning in our early recovery, it's important to pay attention to the things that we're thinking, or as the treatment provider or as the peer recovery coach, that we're helping people understand that they don't have to act on every thought that they have. So in these two skills, radical acceptance and mindfulness of current thought, we're helping people recognize that they don't have to fight the reality, that actually surrendering to the fact that we are struggling with addiction and that we need help is that first step that can lead us to being empowered, which leads us to step 2.
Ladies, I'm going to go ahead and jump in just for a second. This is Adrienne, and I want to just let everyone know in our audience, of course, we always want to be really mindful of anything technical. Everyone was asking, we can't see Megan's face. And I said, no, we can't see Megan's face. There was a little bit of feedback. So Megan is actually muted, but I'm going to ask Devin and Megan, if you feel comfortable and can, if you can mute and unmute as you're talking, and then we'll be able to see Megan's face too. If not, folks, we'll be able to see Megan's face, I'm sure soon, but I wanted to just let everybody know we're navigating that the best we can. So thanks for letting us know. And thank you, Devin and Megan. I'm sorry to interrupt.
All right. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 2, simply put, is hope. When I decided to seek treatment the last time, I was defeated, broken, and had little hope that a life worth living would ever be possible for me. I had attempted to stop using drugs before and felt that I had done everything right at the time, but returned to active addiction. I knew that I couldn't recover on my own. I had tried. I needed the help of something greater. I couldn't continue to live the way that I was. Seeing people around me filled with hope and recovering gave me hope that I could recover too, and the motivation I needed to move forward.
All right, so with step 2, as Megan was sharing, how hope is the spiritual principle of step 2, coming to believe in something is the powerful part of this step. And so it is the same with DBT. When we are helping people with their emotions and we are helping them regulate where they want their life to go, what does that life worth living look like? A lot of times as we're coming out of addiction and into recovery, it's scary. I think a lot of us can admit to the fact that at least in addiction, we knew what to expect. A lot of times we knew the people we'd be hanging out with, we knew the behavior that was expected of us, we knew what not to do. And we also kind of knew where addiction was going to lead us, no matter if to the world it was good or bad. So as we're coming into recovery, there is a lot of unknowns. I'm learning who I am. I'm learning where I want my life to go. I'm learning what type of people do I want to surround myself with? What types of activities am I going to like? Most people don't know those things in early recovery. So with emotion regulation and DBT in therapy, as a peer recovery coach, as a case manager, this is a conversation that I believe is very important and very pertinent to somebody's recovery, is helping give them direction. And step 1, we tell people, okay, you're powerless. Your life has become unmanageable. You need to radically accept that. We're giving them skills. That's where Marsha Linehan alluded to the fact that sometimes people will get furious at learning some of these skills because maybe to some they feel elementary, or they feel like that sense of duh, of course I need to accept this. But the implementation of the skill is where the change actually occurs. And so the same is true with values and priorities. This skill is found in the emotion regulation manual. It's also found under a bigger set of skills called ABC Please. And in the A, it talks about accumulating positive emotion, and that's where values and priorities come into play. Because what we're teaching people is, how do you accumulate positive emotion in the short term, but also how do you focus on values and priorities that will lead you to that life worth living in the long term? And that is where in step 2, we can blend these things by saying, okay, now you've admitted that you're powerless. There was a sense of surrender. There was a sense of kind of, I'm giving up. I'm going to move on from here. And step two, we're saying, okay, well, where am I going actually? And so in step two, that hope that we find is in recognizing that we have choices. We're allowed to say, I don't want to hang out in this scene anymore. I don't want to hang out with people who engage in these activities anymore. But these are the things I want to do. So recognizing that our happiness isn't something that is going to be a consistent, it's not something that's always going to be achieved overnight, is helping people in early recovery recognize that you can still have values and priorities you're working toward. And in that, it teaches them patience and persistence, which, as most of us know in recovery, we really need those skills.
All right, so moving on to step 3. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Faith is at the center of this step. I surrendered to the idea of doing things differently. I accepted that I don't have all the answers, and I sought guidance from a higher power. At times in my recovery, my higher power was simply the people living and working the 12 steps and the support of the people around me. Over time, I was able to connect to God in a way that was meaningful to me. Step 3 is making a commitment to continue to work the rest of the steps, a commitment to myself and to my recovery. As my life began to change for the better, my trust in God and my faith grew.
So for the skills that blend with step 3, we call them turning the mind and burning bridges. Turning the mind comes from distress tolerance skills. Burning bridges comes from the module that I spoke about earlier, when the crisis is addiction. And so turning the mind in step 3, obviously the first few words are made a decision. So in this step, we are teaching the people that we're working with how to make a decision and how do they commit to recovery now. That now they've recognized their surrender, they've recognized their powerlessness in surrendering. They've recognized that there is hope, that there are people out there living life without the use of drugs and alcohol, that people can recover from the disease of addiction, and that they can move forward, and they have some values and priorities now. In step 3, we're helping people understand what it means to make a commitment. And in that, we have to also recognize that there are going to be urges. There's going to be times though where the thought of using crosses their mind, or when something happens and we recognize that, wow, I don't have to use over this today. And what do I do instead? So in turning the mind, we recognize that we're going to continuously come to forks in the road. There's going to be times where we get to make a decision. Am I going to continue to work the steps? Am I going to reach out to my new support system? Or am I going to use? And so this is a conversation that I believe is very important to have as an open dialogue, and not one that makes people feel judged if they do use. We want to make sure that as the people providing service to those struggling with addiction, that we are providing a safe, non-judgmental place for them to come. Because what most of us know is fighting the disease of addiction is not something we can do alone. So in that, we talk about burning bridges. One of the things in burning bridges that I didn't put on here is building new ones. So in DBT, they're essentially talking about actually building new bridges within your brain. They're talking about building like new pathways. And obviously that is symbolic to the actual bridges that we have in our life to people. So in burning bridges, in that skill, it's accepting, like it says, the most radical level that we are not going to re-engage in those behaviors. I will take people through sometimes what are some of your triggers at this point, so that we know during this time frame, if there are urges to use and they are struggling to make that decision to turn their will and their lives over, that they know these are some of the things I definitely should not be engaging in.
Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Step 4 takes courage. It meant taking an inventory of the darkest parts of myself. I couldn't imagine when I started the freedom and growth that would come from working this step. I identified behaviors that had kept me using, and I was starting to see the solution. Drugs were not the problem. I was the problem. My thinking was the problem. Taking inventory shed light on what had kept me stuck.
So with step 4, one of the most important things that I like to remind people of, and even myself in my own recovery journey, is that I cannot judge who I was in my active addiction with the mind that I have today in recovery. It is very important that we recognize the difference in who we are as people between the person who is actively using and the person who is actively seeking recovery. So as a provider, I am working on helping people understand how to remain non-judgmental. That doesn't mean that we put ourselves in risky situations or that we encourage that or condone that. In non-judgmental, it's that I'm observing things as they are. My goal is to catch some of these behaviors or catch some of these thoughts that have kept me stuck, like Megan was talking about in the past, so that I can overcome them and move forward. If I don't recognize them, if I don't know what they are, if I don't take a moral inventory of some of the things that have happened in my relationship or some of the fears that I've had that have kept me using, I am going to get tripped up by them. And that's a reality. So in teaching non-judgmental, we're helping people understand that it's not good or bad, that I wasn't a bad person, that I wasn't, also the best person in the entire world. It's about recognizing what is and doing it with a non-judgmental mind, which then leads us to opposite action. And this is where we start replacing some of those behaviors. It's very important in recovery to recognize that we don't have to act out in the same way that we always did. But I know for me in my early recovery, I would think, okay, you don't want me to use, but what do you want me to do then? Because the only coping skill I've ever had is to use drugs. So if I don't have that, I need to know what to do. So that is where opposite action is one of those skills. It comes from emotion regulation, where we help people recognize what their emotions are and what their urges are to act on them, whether it's to increase them, decrease them. We all have urges based on emotion. So with opposite action, we help people understand you can have an emotion, it can be valid. It doesn't have to be good or bad, but does the way you want to act out on it, is it effective in helping you reach your goal? Or is it going to pull you back more from where you want to be in life? So with opposite action, we recognize the emotion. We ask, does it fit the facts, which is also another skill. Then we decide if acting on that emotion is effective, how am I going to act on that? And if it isn't, how am I going to act opposite to it?
So for step 5, we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. In step 5, we share the dark parts of ourselves with another person, the parts that we kept hidden for so long. I used drugs to be someone else. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I thought that drugs made me a better employee, a better friend, and a better mom. I never felt like I had a place in the world. The honesty displayed in this step gives way for the acceptance we feel when we are not rejected for who we are. It also gives us clarity to the person we are and the person we want to be. I was able to see the value in being myself through the process. I began to feel less alone and hope that I could create a life worth living.
So with DBT skills in step 5 is a step where for the first time, we're asking people to become vulnerable. We're asking them to share with us, whether it's in therapy or it's with a sponsor or it's with a peer recovery coach. We're asking people to share things with us that they may have never shared with anyone before. And so as the person hearing this or receiving this step and teaching the skills to move forward with this, it's helping them recognize emotions, which I started to talk about in step 4. So we help people recognize what is the emotion you're feeling? Where do you feel it? What prompted this emotion? And it may seem tedious because it is, but it's also very important. Emotions, our thoughts, and our actions all play a huge role in our everyday life and the life that we end up creating for ourselves. So if one of those puzzle pieces is missing, as far as identifying emotion, we may be heading in a direction we don't want to be headed in if we aren't recognizing each part of that puzzle. So with identifying emotions, that is exactly what it is. In DBT, it is, I think, 10 or 11 pages of separate primary emotions that Marsha Linehan identifies. And she goes through what is the prompting event, Where do we feel this emotion in our body? Where's our biological response? What is the after effect? And those are just a few pieces of that. So we walk people through that. We take the worksheet that comes along with the DBT workbook or many plethora of other DBT pathways. And we help people identify what is it that you're feeling? When do you feel it? How do you want to act on it? And so another skill from the emotion regulation module is problem solving. So step 5, that's essentially what we're doing. We are taking our moral inventory, we're sharing it with someone, and not just because we're sharing it with a solution in mind, that we're clearing out the wreckage of our past, that we're clearing out the things that are keeping us stuck so that we can start to move in a new direction. So part of that is problem solving. And problem solving, we recognize that sometimes our emotions are valid acting out on them. The emotion that we're having is valid. The way we want to act is valid. The intensity of our emotion is valid. Everything is looking in that direction that, yeah, I have every right to feel this way. I have every right to set a boundary here. I have every right to speak up on what's bothering me. And I think for some of us in recovery, we don't know how to do that with a sober mind. And so this might be the first time that we ever sit down and vulnerably admit things about ourselves, which then teach us moving forward in our later recovery. How do we do those things? How do we recognize our emotions? How do we admit to someone when there's something bothering us? And how do we move on from that? And that's where problem solving is a skill that we can teach in relation to this stuff.
So before we move on to step 6, I just want to check with Adrienne. Are there questions?
No questions so far, just a lot of really positive comments and feedback.
All right. We're going to go with no. Okay, so step 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. In the previous steps, we were able to pull out our character defects, the emotions and behavior patterns we wanted to get rid of. Here, we practice being open-minded and having patience. In my life, character defects showed up as fear, dishonesty, negative thinking, and perfectionism. I desperately wanted to live a different life, and I knew that I needed to make a lot of changes to achieve that. My character defects had developed and become a way to get my needs met and to protect me throughout my addiction. I gained the ability to make choices and to not act on these defects.
So for step 6, wise mind is a skill that comes from the mindfulness module in DBT. And wise mind basically teaches us that we cannot have all of our decisions based in emotion, and we cannot have all of our decisions based in logic. So what we do, and Marshall Linehan teaches this as like a Venn diagram, and it takes our emotions and it takes our logic and it puts them together. And it talks about how do we move forward with our wise mind when our defects of character are presenting, when we want to act out on them, or something happens that bothers us and we've never experienced it before. Maybe it's anger, maybe it's jealousy, maybe it's hurt, sadness. And in those emotions, we've always acted in a certain way that in step 4 and 5, we recognize caused us to have resentments, or we noticed that it caused us to live in fear. So part of step 6 is recognizing that I don't have to continue to act out in these character defects. I can choose to live my life based on my new values and priorities with my new skills. And that is where I have to check into wise mind. Sometimes though, to get into wise mind, we need to use some distress tolerance skills. And in distress tolerance, you'll find distract with accept is one of my most favorite skills to teach. It is helping people learn a new way of coping literally in real time. And I always suggest that people practice these skills when they're not distressed, because when we get to the point of distress, we may not be in that state of mind to practice something new. So as a therapist or coach or case manager, this is a good skill to practice with people if you're able to. And so we go through activities, we go through comparisons, contributing, we go through trying to change our emotions, replace our thoughts, and then we talk about sensations. So the accepts and most of the skills that you'll see, they have acronyms, they all stand for something. And the DBT skill worksheets take you through each of those. So with distract, with accept, sometimes we need to practice some of the distress tolerance skills in order to reduce our intense emotions enough that we can get into wise mind and make a choice that isn't based in our character defects.
Step 7, we humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. Step 7 is about action. I didn't progress in my recovery by wishing things would be different. It took a lot of work. I prayed that God would remove my shortcomings, and he did that by placing people in my path to lead me, by giving me the awareness to recognize when I messed up. I was able to see myself as human and to make mistakes and grow from them without judgment. I set goals and worked to achieve them. I began to recognize my strengths.
So in step 7, when it talks about humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings, one way that I try to teach step 6 and 7 in relation to the skills is that step 6 is the internal and step 7 is the external. So in step 6, we're recognizing these character defects. We're working on reducing our intense emotions. We're recognizing that we do have a wise mind, that inner wisdom, that internal intuition, and we're going to move from that space, hopefully. In step 7, when we humbly ask him to remove those shortcomings, we're recognizing that those character defects lead us to actions and that we are trying to change direction. So fast is a skill that comes from the interpersonal effectiveness skill. Most of the time that our character defects are triggered or some of the emotion urges that we have, they come from interactions with people. And since we can't really get away from people, we have to understand how to interact with them, especially in our early recovery. So FAST helps us to recognize that in each interaction, we can be fair. We don't have to over apologize. We can stick to our values and we can remain truthful. And the reason that I put this skill here in place with step 7 is because in early recovery, we may have interactions with people that we don't want to associate with anymore. Or maybe we are setting boundaries for the first time. Or maybe we are trying to create new relationships with people and we don't want to act from the old parts of us that we're trying to heal. So with FAST, this is how we can learn how to communicate differently, which leads me to talk about the identifying priorities in relationships. DBT teaches us that in every relationship, we have priorities, no matter what. They are all always important. It just depends on how they rate in each interaction. So one of the first priorities is keeping our self-respect, keeping the relationship, or saying no or asking for something. So in each of those priorities, let's just say we're talking about keeping our self-respect. We may use FAST in this situation if keeping our self-respect is our top priority, because in keeping self-respect, I am communicating to the person in front of me that what I'm saying is fair, that I don't have to over apologize, that I'm going to stick to my new values, and that I'm going to remain truthful in order to create healthy relationships. And this is where in step 6 and 7, we're talking a lot about our own selves, but as we change and as we grow and as we heal, the relationships around us do too. So we have to learn how to communicate that, because not everyone can change every single person in their life as far as who they talk to or who they spend time with. So it's about how we interact with them. And the rest of the priorities, the keeping the relationship, asking for or saying no to a request, have relational skills that I don't talk about here, but they are also found in the interpersonal effectiveness module within DBT.
All right, step 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Willingness is the foundation of this step. During the growth in my recovery, I was able to begin to live differently, but I still carried guilt and shame for the person I had been. To gain freedom, I made a list of the people I had harmed. I sought the willingness to make amends to them without fear of their response.
So with step 8, just to reflect for a second, we go from admitting our powerlessness, finding hope, making a decision to stick to our recovery, making a decision and commitment to ourselves that we're not going to engage in any of our old behaviors. We then move to step 4, where we make an inventory of ourselves morally. We look at our relationships, our fears, our sexual relationships. We look at some of the ways that maybe our character defects played into these resentments, fears, and relationships. And then we move forward to step 5, where we say, okay, I have looked at every aspect of my life. These are some of the things that I have seen as patterns that have repeated themselves. I'm now willing to talk about my character defects that are internal, that are keeping me stuck, and how they have played into some of my roles and the harm that I've caused throughout my active addiction. One of those emotions that we teach people how to identify is guilt. And guilt is something that can keep someone using. And so in step 8, as we're progressing through the steps, we get our character defects and our shortcomings from step 4 and 5. And so as we're moving into step 8, we recognize that, man, there's been a whole bunch of people maybe that I have shown my character defects to, that now I need to be willing to make amends to them, and not necessarily for them. I need to make amends to them because I need to have freedom and forgiveness and move forward so that I am not consumed with the things that I've done that have caused harm to other people. That's a big feat for a lot of people. Recognizing the harm that we've caused alone can cause an emotional upheaval. And that's something that I really want us as providers, and I know I keep saying this because I want you to understand that it doesn't have to just be a therapist that helps people through these DBT skills. You can be a peer recovery coach. You can be a family member that gets the knowledge and gets the workbooks and does your best to explain to people what these things are. So I say that because the emotional upheaval that happens for someone in recovery as they're moving through the 12-step pathway of recovery is recognizing, like, wow, I've hurt more people than maybe I really thought. Or maybe the people that I did hurt, I did know, but maybe it's more impactful to me today, the way that it's presenting itself, because I'm sober-minded. And so with DBT skills, we don't want to just say, okay, here's the list. These are all the people you've harmed. You got to say sorry now. Like, that is a very difficult thing to do. So in DBT, what we're blending together with step 8 is the how and what skills. And the how and what skills come from the mindfulness module. And the mindfulness module is talking about how do we be mindful and what do we do when we're mindful. So being mindful requires that we act. And so that we act mindfully, that we think non-judgmentally. We do that effectively, which means that we're focusing on things that we know work, and we're doing it one mindfully. So I am going to encourage the people that I'm working with to not just sit and think about all the people they've caused harm to. Let's focus on one person. And in focusing on that one person, we're practicing one mindfully. We're going to talk about the character defects maybe that presented themselves, and how do we non-judgmentally move into being effective so that we're not then consumed by maybe one of those trigger emotions we identified previously that's going to lead me to want to use. A lot of these emotions are hard for people to feel that don't struggle with the disease of addiction. So it's something to be sensitive about, and also recognize the severity of how powerful emotions can be and how quickly they can push people to action. Skills come into play. So as I'm teaching someone how to be mindful and what that looks like, I'm saying, okay, now what I'm going to have you do is we're going to observe these emotions. We're going to observe your thoughts. We're not going to judge them. We are not going to interpret them or put opinions on them. We are just going to observe them. And then we're going to describe in the same way, without any interpretations, what they are. And as we do that, we are going to participate. So that might mean sitting here and me and Megan talking about that together. That might mean me talking about it with my therapist or my peer recovery coach. So we're talking about how do we be mindful and what does that look like in being mindful. Now, each of these skills, as simply as that may have just come out of my mouth, are all very separate skills that we teach individually. So we teach non-judgmental, we teach one mindful, we teach effectively. The same is true for the what skills. We teach observe, we teach describe, and then we teach participate. And one thing at this point I like to remind people is you're not expected to know how to do anything that you've never been taught. So keep that in mind as you're helping people through this, that this is a process. And when they do act out in a character defect, or when they don't make that amends that you encourage them to make, that you bring them back to safety, you bring them back gently, and you remind them of the new person that they are, the new values that they have, the new priorities that they are working towards, and remind them of that life worth living, which is why I put that skill so early in the steps, because we want to have something to draw back to when people might be struggling.
All right, step 9. We made amends to all people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Here we are making amends and timing is important. The amends are at step 9 for a reason, but I think we often want to rush to make amends as soon as we stop using. I learned that the importance came from cleaning up my side of the street and that it was okay if people didn't accept my amends. The people in my life had heard the I'm sorries before. I followed up my amends by making the commitment to live differently each day. I made living amends each day in recovery by showing up. I showed up as a mother, a daughter, a sister, and a friend. I was able to take responsibility for my actions and my recovery without placing blame on others. The relationships in my life that had been damaged began to rebuild and new relationships were formed.
So in step 9, we look at a skill from emotion regulation, and then we look at one from distress tolerance. In step 9, this is the beginning of the action steps, is the way that it's taught through the 12-step pathway. We are now moving into action. And so, well, the action steps start at step 4, but step 9 is the end of the action step. Sorry for that. So in step 9, we are now ending our action steps, moving into our final kind of admission. And so as we're clearing out the wreckage through step 4 and 5, we're now looking at our defects, we're moving into our amends. And now in step 9, we are actually going to make amends to the people that we have harmed. One thing that we have to really identify is that last part when it says except when. So the except when to do so would injure them or others. I could go on and on about examples for that. But what I would highly suggest is that this is where check the facts comes into play. We're going to look at the emotion. The emotion might be anger. The emotion might be sadness. The emotion might be guilt. The truth of the matter is, in most of the amends that we're going to make, those people may have caused harm to us also. And so that is something to stay mindful of, that I am going to make amends. As I'm going to make amends to people, I am not going to make amends with the bit in my teeth, is what another fellowship alludes to it as. I'm not going there grudgingly. And if I think that that amends is going to make the matters worse, or that it's not going to be a positive experience, I really need to talk to the people in my support system about that. And that's where check the facts comes into play, because sometimes our emotions can get so intense that in my interpretation of accept when might not be the reality. That might be me trying to escape facing something, and in escaping that could really be a trap for me in my recovery. And as the people providing support to those with the disease of addiction, we have to really be mindful of how are we leading people into these amends. Are we really sitting down with them and talking about how do we check the facts on the situation? Is this truly an amends that needs to be made? Or in making this amends, is it going to make the situation worse? So with check the facts in DBT, we're talking specifically about emotions and our action urges on those emotions. So this doesn't just apply to amends. Check the facts applies to a lot of things, is that we're recognizing just because someone looked at me different than I think they should look at me, does that mean that I need to go act out in a character defect on them? Probably not. But that is not always going to be my first train of thought. So this is where we teach people, again, outside of a distressful situation or a highly intense emotional situation, how to check the facts. This skill is also a very tedious, intense worksheet that goes through checking the facts. Where are my opinions and judgments? Now let's check the facts again. Is my intensity of my emotion valid? Does it make sense? Is it justified? Is my action urge really going to lead me to the goal that I have, or is it not going to? So check the facts is a very important skill to teach people, especially as we're moving into the maintenance steps of recovery. And then the same is true for self-soothe. One of the things that we talk about with amends in step 9 is that it can be very distressing. It can cause a lot of anxiety. It can be very draining. when you go and you talk to people about the amends that you've made. And at step 9, eventually, like, you start to recognize at this point, I am a new person. I am living a new way of life. I am different. I'm doing the best that I can. So going back into our past and directly addressing some of these things can be very difficult. So with self-soothe, we talk about this being the self-love skill. That's the way that I always teach it. Is it something that we do when we feel uncomfortable, when it's a short period of time, and that we can get through it with our 5 senses. So we create in DBT, a lot of times a crisis survival box or a self-soothe box, or they have many different names, where you put things that you enjoy of your 5 senses into one place so that when you are struggling, you can pull that box out, and it might have, you know, a reminder of make a cup of coffee because that helps you feel better. Go take a bath. Maybe go outside and listen to the streets or listen to the birds, whatever you prefer. Go for a walk. Those types of reminders are very important at this point in the step.
All right, in step 10, we continue to take personal inventory and we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Step 10 allows us to create new habits and behavior patterns. By taking daily inventory of our day, we can examine what went well and what could have gone better. When we make mistakes, we can correct them. If we act in a way we didn't want to, we can apologize. Daily inventory prevents the buildup of negativity and poor choices. It was an area where I could begin to challenge my beliefs. In active addiction, I didn't have a lot of choices. In recovery, my life was filled with opportunity and decisions to make. I needed to evaluate my decisions on a regular basis to align my choices with my values.
So in step 10, one of the skills that I teach is called please. It comes from the emotion regulation module in DBT. One of the words that comes to mind when I'm teaching this that I related to is halt. Never get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Please is very much the same. As it goes a little bit more in depth, talking about treating your physical illness. If you're sick, take care of yourself. If you need to take medication, take it. Make sure that you're not overeating or undereating, that you're eating proper nutrition, that you're avoiding mind and mood altering substances. Sometimes that's even caffeine for those of us in recovery. That we're getting enough sleep, that we're making sure that when we are getting sleep, that it's restful and uninterrupted, and that we are checking in on our emotions. So the please skill takes us through, again, it's an acronym. So there's multiple skills within this one skill in emotion regulation. And this relates clearly to step 10, because if we are to continue to take a personal inventory, we want to make sure that we're also in the best state possible that we can be in. And that takes a lot of work sometimes. For most of us in active addiction, that's not what we did. We didn't pay attention to our physical illness, or if we were getting enough to eat, or if we were sleeping enough. And even in recovery, things can take us away, it can take our attention, and we start to not take care of ourselves. And in that, our emotional mind takes over. And that's where we can be susceptible to some of those character defects. Even if it isn't using thoughts at a certain point, we can be taken back over by ways that we don't want to act out in. So with the please skill, it's a nice reminder that we are checking in on ourselves. And it, like I said, it's relatable to the halt skill.
In step 11, we came to believe that a power greater than us could restore us to sanity. My routine of self-care and reflection strengthened my mind, body, and spirit, helping me to remain spiritually fit. Remaining spiritually fit allows for continued growth. I was once told, if you're not working on your recovery, you're working on your relapse. Step 11 is a maintenance step and gives us the ability to face challenges as they arise. I can stop, think, and reflect before acting. I can turn to my higher power for guidance in facing challenges rather than turning to substances to avoid and disconnect. As my relationship with my higher power grew, I could ask for help, which brought relief.
So with step 11, we have the wrong step underneath step 11. So I apologize for that. I just recognize that. But we talk about improving the moment. So improving the moment is replacing the immediate negative events with more positive ones. So again, improve is an acronym within this skill that lists different activities that we can do to improve that current moment. We recognize that in these moments of recovery in our day-to-day life that everything isn't always good. And so as we're connecting to our higher power and we're recognizing that we do have the power of prayer and we do have the power of meditation, that we can change a moment even if it is distressing to us. Improve the moment is found in distress tolerance, and it's one of those skills that does highlight prayer. It also highlights encouragement, so that positive self-talk. It also encourages us to create meaning in the moment and to practice imagery, which a lot of times you can even start practicing that on YouTube with the guided imagery meditation. That really helps to create a safe place with us inside of our own mind. So that's something we can take with us anywhere. That's also something I encourage to be practiced with a provider to help someone. Getting on YouTube and practicing meditation alone or guided imagery isn't something that is everyone's top list of things to do. So if we can sit with them and support and encourage them in learning how to do that, if that's something they enjoy, that is a very powerful coping skill to help support step 11 in their recovery.
All right, and step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to addicts that still suffer and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. Connection and a sense of belonging within the fellowship created an atmosphere for me to be myself. Recovery was not always easy, but having a support system in place helped me through the difficult times. Sharing the message gives us the opportunity to provide hope that others can recover too. For me, being of service gave purpose to my pain. I was able to use my experience to help someone else.
So in this final step of the 12 steps of recovery pathway, community reinforcement is a skill found in the When the Crisis is Addiction module within DBT. And it talks about what step 12 essentially is, that through the 12 steps, we've had a spiritual awakening. We've been able to identify that we do struggle with the disease of addiction, that a different way of life is possible, and that we're going to do whatever it takes to obtain that, maintain that, and build that. So with DBT and the skills that we're teaching people, community reinforcement is so important. Sometimes that is the 12-step meeting. Sometimes that is a support group, maybe even at CMH. Sometimes that could be a church body or a group of people that you decide to start building new bridges with who have similar values and priorities. And this is where community reinforcement is so important, because we have to, in order to move forward and grow in our recovery, have people in our life that are nurturing us and that are positive supports for us. So as the treatment provider, we're recognizing that sometimes people don't understand that. They think that they can do it all by themselves. And they think that with their sheer willpower that they will overcome the disease of addiction. And this is an awesome opportunity for us to educate them and encourage them and really try to get down to the root of what makes them not want to build new relationships or connect with other people. So that dialogue for people is very important to help them understand that practicing these principles that they've now learned through the 12 steps really does help reinforce their community engagement. So with that being said, this is the end of the blend of 12 steps and the DBT skills. And like I said, there is a lot more to that. So this is our contact information. That is my Instagram and my email address. Megan has her email address on there. So if you have any questions about anything we've said or you want more detail, we are more than willing to share that with you. You can reach out to us. At this point, I think we are going to answer any questions that there might be if Adrienne wants to let us know.
I sure can. Someone had asked if you can break down.
And while she's gathering that, I just want to say when I worked the 12 steps, I thought that this could be good for everybody, that everybody could benefit from living these spiritual principles and from, being honest and gaining acceptance. And the same thing with DBT, especially when it comes to substance abuse. DBT really seemed like something that was only for like this group of people, and research has shown that it is really beneficial for substance use. And so these are skills that everybody can use and that everybody can learn and benefit from.
All right. One of the first couple people asked if you wouldn't mind throwing back up your slide with your contact information.
Oh, sorry about that.
No problem. They just
There you
were
go.
asking, so that's awesome. So there's the contact information. Someone had asked, can you break down more the removal of shortcomings?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Can you, someone asked more about the removal of shortcomings, if you can break that down a little bit more?
Well, I think that it's a process, number one. I don't know necessarily that it's like an event, and that's a really good question, because I do think sometimes the way the steps label it, it sort of maybe feels that way. And so that is where the DBT skills, in my opinion, come into play so powerfully, and they can be so influential to people's recovery, to recognize that in removing some of the ways that we act out on our character defects, which in my opinion is the shortcomings in step 7, we have to replace those. We have to recognize what those behaviors are, what those shortcomings are, how we maybe respond to those triggering intense emotions, and then replace them with new behaviors. And that is my favorite thing about DBT, is that it's a behavioral therapy. So I'm not just saying, let me dig into your mind and we'll figure this out. I'm saying, let's talk about this and let's replace that behavior with something more productive and effective for you and your life worth living. I hope that answers that question.
And I think, in the 12 steps, we really focus on asking God to remove those shortcomings. And like I said, for me, that really showed up with the people that he placed in my life, having people that would call me out, that would say, bring light to when I was acting on a character defect, or when I was doing something that maybe wasn't great for my recovery. Yeah. Any other questions?
Is DBT good for those with BPD that have constant suicidal ideations?
Adrian, I'm so sorry, because we keep muting both of our speakers, so we haven't been able to hear you, and we just realized that. So
No
what was the first part of
problem.
that question?
No problem. Is DBT good for those with BPD that have constant suicidal ideations?
So DBT was initially created only for borderline personality disorder. So when you look at the textbook, that is, the basics of what I'm talking about, it's called cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm going to show it to you really quick, because I actually did. I'm sorry. So cognitive behavioral therapy for borderline personality disorder, that was created by Marshall Linehan. And it was created for borderline personality disorder before anything else ever, because of the intense suicidal ideation and self-harm that comes with that disorder. So yes, 100%.
Great. So we're actually winding down, getting close to 3 p.m. and we want to certainly honor everyone's time at 3 p.m. on a Friday. There are some other questions that we weren't able to get to, but again, Devin and Megan shared contact information, and I'm sure they would be welcome for you to reach out to them with any questions that they weren't able to get to today. So with that being said, want to definitely thank Devin and Megan. There are so many comments in the chat box just saying what a great presentation and what wonderful information, reminders and things like that. So we really appreciate, Devin and Megan, your time today, the presentation. It was certainly well thought out. It was presented in a wonderful way that really, I even was, strongly impacted just the way that you were able to show different sides, and we really appreciate that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Adrian.
Great. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and just do a really quick wrap up and reminder for those of you that are still on, which is hoping is everybody. We want to remind everyone that the Recovery Summit continues to go on all month of September with different topics and speakers all week long during the weekdays. The next presentation will be Monday at 10 a.m. Presented by Victor Polito from St. Clair County Community Mental Health on his recovery story, his search for serenity. To see information and register for additional sessions, please visit sccmh.org under the Events tab and the Recovery Summit. As a reminder too, individuals that are requesting any kind of professional credits, McBAP social work, peer credits, you will receive one certificate of accumulated credits by October 30th via the email that you showed us or provided on the registrations. So you'll get one printout with everything that you attended from the summit. As a reminder too, for anybody requesting professional CEs, but everyone else, we would love to hear your feedback. Megan and Devin would love it. We would love it as an agency to see what your feedback is about this presentation and the webinar series itself. And again, thank you to our presenters, Devin and Megan. Your time and information is unbelievably appreciated. Thank you to all of you that attended this afternoon. Have a great day and have a great weekend. Thank you.